The story begins with the soft hum of a small-town grocery store. Sunlight filters through wide glass windows, painting long, golden lines across the polished floor. The air smells faintly of coffee and fresh bread. It's the kind of morning that feels safe, predictable, where every sound has its place. Behind the counter stands Ethan, a young store clerk in his early 20s. He moves carefully, methodically, arranging items with quiet precision. He greets customers with a warm smile, a smile that hides how nervous he feels each time he has to speak. When he talks, his words come out in slow, uneven rhythms. He stutters, sometimes just for a second, sometimes for longer. And though most people are kind, every stumble feels loud to him, like an echo that never fades. Still, Ethan loves mornings. He loves how the store feels before the rush, peaceful, gentle, and forgiving. Here, for a few hours, he feels in control. Every day starts the same. He clocks in, ties his apron, and takes a deep breath before greeting his manager. Mrs. Taylor, a kind woman in her 50s, always gives him a reassuring nod. She knows about his stutter. She never finishes his sentences. She just listens. Ethan checks the shelves, wipes the counter, and arranges the candy near the register. Children come in before school to buy snacks. He loves how they laugh, not at him, but just at life. As the morning moves on, regular customers drift in. Mr. Jenkins, who buys the same newspaper every day. The elderly couple who always hold hands. A nurse on her way to work, grabbing a coffee and muffin. Ethan knows them all by face, not always by name. They smile. They talk. They listen patiently. The world feels kind, at least for now. But under that calm, Ethan carries a quiet storm. He remembers all the times people laughed, in school, in job interviews, even in simple conversations. He remembers one teacher who told him, "You just need to slow down." But it wasn't that simple. Every time he speaks, he feels like he's walking on a thin wire. One wrong sound, and it all comes tumbling down. He's learned to adapt, use shorter words, avoid certain sounds, rehearse greetings in his head. Yet, every "GG good morning" feels like a battle won. He dreams of speaking freely, of telling stories, of standing up for himself. But for now, he just focuses on the next customer, the next smile, the next moment. Around noon, the store grows busier. The calm morning turns into a chorus of footsteps and chatter. Ethan's hands move faster, scanning items, handing out receipts, thanking each person with a quiet, "Thank you." Then, the door swings open. A man walks in, tall, dressed in a dark suit, holding his phone like a weapon. His expression is sharp, his tone impatient. He looks like he's late for something, or maybe just angry at the world. Ethan feels it instantly, the shift in the air. Some people carry storms with them, and this man is one of them. He grabs a few items and heads straight for Ethan's register. Ethan's heart starts to race. The man places his things down, milk, bread, and a pack of cigarettes. He sighs loudly, checking his phone again. "Can we hurry this up?" he mutters. Ethan nods. "Why? Yes, sir." He scans the first item, then the next, his voice trembling slightly. The stutter creeps in, uninvited. The man's eyes flick up, annoyed. The line grows behind him, a few people waiting quietly, sensing tension. And near the back of the line stands Mrs. Ramirez, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. She watches silently, noticing more than most would. Ethan tries again, his voice catching on a simple word. And that's when the man scoffs. It's quiet, but cruel, a sound that cuts deeper than words. Ethan freezes for half a second. His cheeks burn. The scanner beeps. The world feels smaller. He forces a smile, pretending not to notice. But the man leans closer and says under his breath, "Maybe you should work somewhere you don't have to talk." Silence spreads through the store. Even the hum of the refrigerators seems to pause. Ethan looks down, trying to finish the transaction. But before he can, a calm, steady voice speaks from behind the impatient man. "Excuse me," says Mrs. Ramirez. Her tone is soft, but it carries the weight of something about to change. And in that still moment, everyone turns to listen. The store, moments ago so peaceful, feels suddenly smaller. The air thickens, the kind of tension you can almost touch. Ethan's hands shake slightly as he tries to finish scanning the items. He forces a smile. "That'll be $4.22, sir." The words stumble, tripping over themselves. The man, Mr. Harding, exhales sharply, shaking his head. He taps his fingers against the counter, loud and impatient. "Can you just spit it out already?" he says. The words cut through the soft music playing in the background. The other customers go silent. Ethan's face flushes red. He looks down, wishing the floor would swallow him whole. Time slows. Every sound fades, the hum of the refrigerators, the soft chatter in the aisles, all gone. All that remains is the pounding in his chest and the echo of the man's voice. Ethan tries again, but his voice cracks. I'm sorry, IJ, just." Mr. Harding interrupts, his tone sharp. "Sorry doesn't help, kid. Maybe you should find a job where talking isn't part of it." A few people shift uncomfortably in line. One woman looks down at her shoes. A man coughs, pretending not to hear. No one says anything. Ethan swallows hard. His throat feels tight. He presses the buttons slowly, focusing on the register screen instead of the customer's glare. He's been through this before, but it never stops hurting. Inside, his thoughts blur. Don't cry. Don't make it worse. Just get through this. His chest feels heavy, his breath shallow. He thinks about all the times people told him to just relax, but they didn't know how it felt, how every syllable was like climbing a hill that keeps getting steeper. The store's rhythm is gone now. Every pair of eyes in line seems to be watching, even those pretending not to. Mr. Harding mutters something under his breath, something Ethan can't quite catch, but it feels cruel. He feels exposed, as if his stutter has stripped him of dignity. He wants to speak clearly, to prove he's more than this one moment. But the harder he tries, the worse it gets. His voice breaks again. The silence that follows is louder than any insult. Then, from the corner of the line, a soft movement. Mrs. Ramirez, the woman with the kind eyes, tilts her head slightly. She's been watching quietly, her face unreadable, not angry, not shocked, just thoughtful. Her hands rest gently on the handle of her shopping basket. She's seen moments like this before, cruelty wrapped in impatience. But something in Ethan's trembling hands and lowered gaze stirs something in her heart. Ethan finishes scanning the last item. He forces the words out. "That'll be F422. Mr. Harding tosses a $5 bill onto the counter. It slides off and lands on the floor. He doesn't pick it up. Ethan bends down, grabs it, and places it carefully in the register. His fingers feel clumsy, his body numb. He counts the change, his lips trembling. When he tries to speak, his voice falters again. "Why, your change is—" "Forget it," Mr. Harding snaps. Just keep it. You probably need it more than I do. A cruel smirk crosses his face. Someone in line gasps quietly. A young boy, holding his mother's hand, looks up at the man with confusion. Ethan's throat tightens. He nods silently, wanting the moment to end. His vision blurs slightly, not from tears yet, but from shame pressing in too tightly. From a few feet away, Mrs. Ramirez takes a slow breath. Her eyes don't leave Ethan's face. She sees the way his hands tremble, how he's holding everything inside. She's been a teacher for over 20 years. She's seen bullies in many forms, some in classrooms, some in workplaces, some right here in stores like this. And she knows that silence is the greatest accomplice to cruelty. Still, she waits a moment longer. She watches the others, the man pretending to check his phone, the woman pretending to fix her purse. No one speaks. And then she looks back at Mr. Harding, standing tall, proud of his impatience. Her jaw tightens slightly. Her voice, when she finally speaks, is calm, steady. But beneath it, there's fire. Ethan's thoughts swirl in panic. Why can't I just talk like everyone else? Why does it always have to be like this? He can feel his chest tighten, his heartbeat racing. He remembers being 7 years old, standing in front of his class, trying to read a poem, while his classmates giggled softly. He remembers promising himself that next time, he'd get it right. Next time, he'd be strong. But somehow, every time feels like the first. Every stumble feels like a spotlight. And now, under Mr. Harding's glare, that spotlight burns. He clenches his jaw, trying to hold it together. The words won't come, but the pain doesn't need them. Mr. Harding grabs his bag and turns to leave, muttering, "Unbelievable! What a waste of time!" He starts to walk past the line, head high, convinced he's made his point. But then, that calm, steady voice cuts through the silence. "Excuse me." The tone isn't loud, but it stops him instantly. Everyone turns. It's Mrs. Ramirez. Her eyes meet his, unwavering but kind. There's no anger in her voice, only quiet authority, the kind that makes people listen. She steps forward, one small step that changes the entire mood of the store. Her grocery basket swings gently at her side. Ethan blinks, frozen, watching her. And just like that, the world seems to pause again. But this time, it's not from fear. It's from anticipation. Something is about to change. "Excuse me," said Mrs. Ramirez again, her voice calm yet commanding. The store froze. Even the hum of the refrigerators seemed to fade as everyone turned toward her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Mr. Harding turned halfway, his expression caught between surprise and annoyance. He hadn't expected anyone to speak, certainly not someone so calm. "Yes," he said sharply. "What is it?" Mrs. Ramirez met his eyes, unshaken. "I just thought you should know," she said softly, "that sometimes the kindest thing a person can do is wait." Her words hung in the air, not loud, but heavy. The kind of words that settle slowly, making everyone think twice before speaking. Ethan stood still behind the counter, his breath caught in his throat. No one had ever stood up for him like this. Not with anger, but with grace. Mr. Harding let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Look, lady, I don't have time for some lecture. I was just trying to check out." Mrs. Ramirez nodded slightly. "I understand," she said. "You're in a hurry. But sometimes, when we rush, we forget that other people are trying too, just in a different way." The line was utterly silent now. No one moved. No one looked away. Mr. Harding frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said gently, "that not everyone's battles are visible. Some people fight to walk, some to breathe, some to speak. And what costs you a few seconds might cost them every ounce of courage they have." Her voice wasn't angry. It was kind. But it carried a truth that hit harder than any insult. Mrs. Ramirez glanced briefly at Ethan, then back at Mr. Harding. "When I was younger," she began, "I had a brother named Miguel. He stuttered too." The store seemed to lean closer. Even the little boy holding his mother's hand stared up at her. "Miguel was the kindest person I knew," she continued. "But people didn't always see that. They saw the pauses in his speech, not the meaning in his words. He used to tell me that every sentence felt like swimming upstream. But he kept swimming anyway." Her eyes softened with memory. "One day, at a diner, a man made fun of him, the way you just did. He laughed in his face because Miguel couldn't say the word coffee. And you know what Miguel did. He smiled, handed the man his cup, and said, 'It's okay. You'll understand someday.'" She paused, her voice gentle but unwavering. "That was the last time he ever spoke in public. He passed away a year later." A quiet gasp rippled through the line. Ethan's eyes glistened. Mr. Harding's smirk faded, replaced by discomfort, the kind that no longer had power. The atmosphere had changed completely. What was once an ordinary grocery store now felt like something sacred, a small corner of truth. The customers who had looked away now lifted their heads. A woman near the end of the line whispered, "Bless her." The young boy's mother placed her hand over her heart. Even the sound of the ceiling fan seemed slower, as if the whole world was listening. Mrs. Ramirez continued softly, "We never know what someone's carrying. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're scared. Or maybe they've been mocked so many times that silence feels safer than speech." She looked at Ethan, not with pity, but with pride. "And yet here he is," she said, "showing up, doing his job, still trying. That's courage, Mr. Harding. That's strength." Ethan blinked, his throat tightening. He wanted to speak, to thank her, but his voice was locked behind emotion. Mr. Harding shifted uneasily. His face flushed, a mix of guilt and defensiveness. He looked around, realizing all eyes were on him now. "I didn't mean," he started, his tone quieter now. But Mrs. Ramirez didn't let him finish harshly. She smiled, a small, forgiving smile. "I know," she said. "Most people don't mean to be cruel. They just forget what kindness sounds like." Her words weren't sharp, but they landed deeply. The kind of truth that lingers, even after the moment passes. Mr. Harding's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He looked down, eyes darting to the floor. For a moment, he didn't seem like the villain anymore, just another person who'd lost touch with compassion. Then something unexpected happened. The man behind Mrs. Ramirez stepped forward slightly. He placed his items on the counter and said gently to Ethan, "Take your time, son. No rush." Another woman nodded. "Yes, we can wait." The quiet chain of kindness spread through the line. The same people who moments ago had stayed silent were now choosing empathy. Ethan felt it. The shift, the warmth, the silent apology from everyone who hadn't spoken before. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. The kind of human change that begins small, then ripples outward. Mr. Harding took a slow breath, his pride melting into regret. He looked at Ethan, then at Mrs. Ramirez. "You said your brother," he began softly. "Yes," she said. He taught me that patience isn't about waiting, it's about understanding. For a long second, Mr. Harding didn't respond. Then, almost awkwardly, he muttered, I shouldn't have said that. His voice cracked slightly, not from anger, but something closer to shame. Mrs. Ramirez nodded. We all have moments we wish we could take back. What matters is what we do after. He nodded silently, picked up his bag, and turned to Ethan. Sorry, kid, he said, his voice low but sincere. Really? Sorry. Ethan managed a small nod. Thank you, he whispered. For the first time, his stutter didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. Mrs. Ramirez placed her basket on the counter next. As Ethan scanned her items, their eyes met briefly. She smiled, a warm, reassuring smile that said, You did nothing wrong. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. He wanted to tell her how much her words meant. He wanted to say thank you, properly, clearly. But no words came. And that was okay. Because in that moment, she already understood. Keep being you, she said softly as she handed him a $5 bill. The world needs more people who keep trying. He nodded, eyes glassy, unable to speak. But his silence said everything. When Mrs. Ramirez left, the bell above the door chimed softly. The sound lingered, almost musical. Ethan stood there for a moment, not moving. The world felt still, not empty, just peaceful, like the moment after a storm, when the air smells clean and new. He looked at the register, at the half-folded receipt still in his hand. Then he looked toward the window, where sunlight spilled in again, just as it had that morning. And for the first time that day, Ethan smiled, a real smile, not to hide anything, but because he finally felt seen. The doorbell chimed softly as Mrs. Ramirez walked out of the store. No one spoke for a few seconds after she left. It was as if her words had left a faint echo in the air, something invisible but powerful. Ethan stood behind the counter, still staring at the spot where she had been. Her presence lingered, like warmth after sunlight fades. He wasn't sure what to do next. The register beeped quietly, reminding him that the line still waited. Then, something unexpected happened. A man near the front, the same one who had been silent earlier, cleared his throat. He stepped forward with a small smile and said, Hey, take your time, son. No rush. We're not going anywhere. Ethan blinked. For a moment, he couldn't find words, not because he stuttered, but because he didn't expect kindness. He nodded softly. Thank you. And just like that, the energy in the store shifted again, this time toward peace. The next customer, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, placed her groceries gently on the counter. I'm sorry for not saying something sooner, she murmured. Her tone wasn't dramatic, just honest. You didn't deserve that. Ethan's chest tightened, not with pain, but gratitude. He smiled shyly, lowering his gaze. It's okay, he said softly. Thank you. As she gathered her change, another customer, a young man in a hoodie, stepped up and began helping Ethan bag the items. No worries, dude, he said with an easy smile. I got this. Ethan tried to protest, but the words tangled, and the young man waved it off. Seriously, it's cool. Teamwork, right? The customers behind them chuckled lightly. It was such a simple thing, a hand reaching out, yet it carried a meaning no lecture could match. One by one, people began to soften. Someone opened the door for the next person. Someone picked up a dropped receipt. Tiny gestures, but each one was an echo of Mrs. Ramirez's courage. The cruelty that had filled the air minutes ago had dissolved, replaced by something fragile and human. As the line grew shorter, Ethan found his rhythm again. The scanner beeped with each item, a steady, gentle sound. He began to notice its rhythm, how it pulsed through the quiet like a heartbeat. Beep, pause, beep. Every sound felt alive, like reassurance. He realized that for years he had tried to make his speech sound normal. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't need to. He thought about Mrs. Ramirez's words. Not everyone's battles are visible. The words kept replaying in his mind, sinking deeper with every scan. For the first time, he wasn't angry about his stutter. He was proud. Proud that he kept showing up. A few minutes later, Mrs. Taylor, the store manager, came over from the back office. She'd heard bits and pieces of what happened. Her eyes softened when she saw Ethan's face. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Why, yeah," he said. "I think so." She smiled. "You handled yourself better than most would. I'm proud of you." Those words, "I'm proud of you," hit harder than any insult could. Ethan felt something loosen inside him, like a knot he'd been holding for years. "Thank you, Mrs. T. Taylor," he said quietly. She patted his arm. "Take a minute, okay? Get some water." Ethan nodded again and stepped away from the counter for a moment, letting the air settle around him. The sound of the store slowly returned. Quiet chatter, the hum of freezers, the distant buzz of life moving on. But somehow, it all felt new. Back at the counter, a young mother with her son approached. The little boy, maybe 7, placed a candy bar on the counter and looked up at Ethan. "My teacher says we should always be kind," he said softly. "Are you okay, mister?" Ethan smiled, warmth spreading through him. He crouched slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "I'm good," he said, his voice calm. Thank you for asking." The boy smiled back. His mother's eyes glistened a little as she took his hand. They left with a quiet, "Have a nice day," but the moment lingered. That small exchange, so innocent, so pure, stayed with Ethan long after they left. He realized that kindness didn't have to come in grand speeches. Sometimes it came in small voices that simply asked if you were okay. Later that afternoon, when the store had quieted again, Ethan found himself staring out the window. The light outside had shifted. Golden hour, when the world looks softer, forgiving. He thought about Mrs. Ramirez again. He imagined her walking down the street, groceries in hand, unaware of the quiet transformation she had sparked behind her. People she'd never meet would think differently now, maybe more patiently, maybe more kindly. Her lesson didn't stay in the store. It rippled outward, unseen but alive. He wondered what her brother, Miguel, had been like. Maybe he smiled like she did, calm, knowing, kind. Maybe he'd once stood in a moment like this, torn between shame and courage. Ethan felt a deep ache. Not sadness, exactly, but something close to gratitude wrapped in sorrow. Because her story had become part of his. As the day neared its end, Ethan found himself working slower, not from exhaustion, but from reflection. He noticed the smallest things now. The rhythm of footsteps on the tile. The murmur of quiet conversations. The sound of the scanner, steady and sure. Each beep felt like a heartbeat, his own, steadying after the storm. He started timing his breaths with it. Inhale, beep. Exhale, beep. A strange calm filled him. He no longer heard his stutter as something broken. He heard it as rhythm, imperfect but human. Every pause, every repetition was part of who he was. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to change it. Before closing time, Mrs. Taylor came by again. She handed Ethan a cup of coffee. "On the house," she said warmly. "You earned it." Ethan smiled. Thank you." She looked at him for a moment, then added quietly, "You know, that woman who stood up earlier, she wasn't just helping you. She reminded all of us what grace looks like." Ethan nodded, gripping the warm cup between his hands. He didn't say anything, but inside he felt a soft, glowing strength. He'd spent years feeling like his voice didn't belong. Now, he realized it always had. It just needed someone to listen. The store emptied slowly. The sun dipped low, and the quiet of evening wrapped around everything like a gentle blanket. Ethan cleaned the counter, stacked receipts, and shut down his register. The scanner light blinked off, one soft beep marking the end of the day. He looked around the empty store. The aisles stood still, bathed in the amber light of sunset. And though nothing looked different, everything felt different. He walked to the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and locked it. Then he paused, glancing at his reflection in the glass. Faint, but there. The boy who had walked into work that morning looked uncertain, tired, small. The person staring back now looked the same, but his eyes were steadier. That night, in his small apartment, Ethan stood in front of his bathroom mirror. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. He looked at his reflection, at the slight curve of his lips, the nervous crease in his brow. He took a breath and said, "Gee, good evening." The words stumbled, but he didn't wince. He tried again. "Gee, good evening." This time, his voice steadied a little. He smiled. He looked at himself, really looked, and whispered, "You're doing okay." The mirror reflected not just his face, but the courage he'd carried all along. The kind of courage that no one could see, but everyone could feel, like the quiet beat of a heart learning to trust itself again. Outside, the night settled softly over the town. Somewhere, a car passed, and the world kept moving. But in that small apartment, something beautiful had changed. Quietly, permanently. Ethan smiled once more and whispered, "Thank you, Mrs. R. Ramirez." Then he turned off the light. And in the darkness, his heart beat steady, just like the scanner at the store. Beep. Pause. Beep. The rhythm of courage. Days passed after that afternoon in the store, yet the moment refused to fade. People who had been there carried it with them, in conversations, in reflection, in small acts they couldn't quite explain. They spoke softer to cashiers. They smiled longer at strangers. Something subtle had shifted, and Ethan, though he tried to move on, still felt it every time he spoke. The stutter was still there, but so was something new. A calmness, a sense that his voice, no matter how uneven, mattered. The world outside hadn't changed much. Cars still honked impatiently. Phones still buzzed. People still rushed. But inside the store, inside Ethan, something had slowed down. Something had learned to listen. The truth is, the world rarely waits. It runs, always forward, chasing seconds, schedules, screens. We measure life by speed. Fast internet, fast food, fast replies. But kindness doesn't move fast. It waits. It breathes. It listens. We live in a time where patience feels like weakness, and silence feels like failure. We fill pauses with noise because stillness feels uncomfortable. But if you listen closely, truly listen, you'll hear that every pause carries meaning. Ethan's stutter was never just about speech. It was about the world's discomfort with imperfection. His pauses made people uneasy, not because they were long, but because they forced them to stop. And stopping, in a world built on hurry, feels like rebellion. Years before the grocery store, Ethan had been a quiet child in a noisy world. In 5th grade, he sat in the back of the classroom, doodling quietly as the teacher called names for roll. Ethan, he said, trying. A few kids giggled. He lowered his head, cheeks burning. The teacher smiled kindly, but said the wrong words. "Take your time, dear." And though they sounded gentle, they made the room feel heavier, because everyone turned to watch him take his time. At lunch, he'd sit with his tray, listening to others talk over each other. He wanted to join in. He had jokes, thoughts, stories, but by the time he gathered the courage to speak, the topic had already changed. So he stayed quiet. That's when silence stopped being peaceful and became armor, a way to protect himself from laughter. But deep down, he still hoped someone, someday, would wait long enough to listen. High school brought a new chapter, and a new hope. Twice a week, he visited Ms. Daniels, a speech therapist with bright eyes and a warm voice. She never rushed him. They would sit across from each other, a small clock ticking softly in the background. "Say it again," she'd whisper, "but this time don't fight the pause." Ethan frowned. "But that's the P part people laugh at." Ms. Daniels smiled gently. "That's the part that's you." He didn't understand then, but those words stayed with him, waiting for a moment years later when he finally would. Every session, she'd say the same phrase before he left. "Every stutter is a story waiting for patience." He didn't realize until now how true that was, how every stumble in his voice carried a lesson the world desperately needed to learn. 2 days after the incident at the store, a young woman who had been in line posted about it online. Her post began simply, "Today, I saw something that changed how I think about kindness." She described the scene, Ethan's stutter, the impatient customer, Mrs. Ramirez's calm intervention. She ended it with, "The way she stood up for him wasn't loud. It was love. The way he kept speaking wasn't weakness. It was courage." The post spread fast. At first, just a few likes. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Within a day, it had been shared across platforms. #the grocery lesson, people called it. A story about a moment that seemed ordinary, but wasn't. News outlets picked it up. Podcasts discussed it. Comment sections filled with people sharing their own stories, of stutters, scars, struggles. Some wrote, "This was me." Others wrote, "This reminded me to slow down." And somewhere between all the noise of the internet, Ethan's story became more than a post. It became a mirror. Ethan didn't even know about it at first. He wasn't on social media much. He found out when Mrs. Taylor showed him her phone behind the counter one morning. "Look at this," she said, smiling. On the screen was a photo of the store, taken from outside, with the caption, "A reminder that empathy is contagious." Ethan blinked. "That's here?" Mrs. Taylor nodded. "That's you, Hon. You've gone viral." He laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. Does that mean, P, people know?" "They know you stood there and didn't give up," she said. "They know someone saw your strength." For the rest of the day, customers came in with soft smiles. Some said nothing, just looked at him with quiet recognition. Others said, "You're the young man from that story, aren't you?" Each time, Ethan blushed. Maybe," he'd reply. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt human, finally seen, not for how he spoke, but for who he was. Across the town, teachers began sharing the story in classrooms. Speech therapists quoted Mrs. Ramirez's words to new students. Patience isn't waiting, it's understanding. Parents read it to their children before bed. Somewhere, a boy with a stutter whispered the line to himself before school. And somewhere else, a girl who had mocked someone before quietly decided she wouldn't again. The story rippled far beyond that grocery store. It crossed cities, languages, and borders. Because kindness, once spoken, doesn't stay still. It travels, like sound waves through silence. And yet, for Ethan, the noise of attention felt complicated. He was grateful, but he was also scared. One night, after the store closed, Ethan scrolled through the posts on Mrs. Taylor's phone. He saw comments like, "That boy is brave. That teacher's a saint. This gives me hope for humanity." He smiled, but part of him felt uneasy, because he wasn't sure how to be the person people imagined. They saw courage. He still felt fear. They saw change. He still heard his stutter, sharp and unrelenting in his ears. He whispered to himself, "I'm N, not brave. I'm just T, trying." And maybe that was enough. Maybe trying was bravery, just quieter than the world expected. Maybe that's what change really looks like, not in protests or headlines, but in the small moments when someone chooses patience over pride. The narrator's voice softens now, almost meditative. Some people learn kindness by being shown it. Others learn it by seeing cruelty and realizing they don't want to be that way. The grocery store wasn't a battlefield. It was a mirror, one that reflected who we are when we think no one's watching. Mrs. Ramirez didn't fight fire with fire. She fought impatience with compassion. And that's how revolutions begin, not in noise, but in gentleness. The story became a quiet anthem for those who speak differently, move differently, or simply live at a slower pace than the world demands. And in that way, Ethan's stutter, once his greatest burden, became a voice for countless others who had none. A week later, a letter arrived at the store. It was addressed to the kind clerk. Inside, written in neat cursive, was a short message. "I saw the video of you and the woman who stood up for you. My daughter stutters too. Tonight, for the first time, she said good night to me without whispering. Thank you for giving her courage." Ethan read the note 3 times before folding it gently and placing it in his pocket. He didn't know the sender. He didn't need to. That letter was enough to remind him that even small moments could change lives, just as Mrs. Ramirez's words had changed his. The following Sunday morning, the store was quiet again. Sunlight poured through the same windows, just as it always had. Ethan stood behind the counter, his apron neatly tied, the scanner waiting. When the first customer arrived, he smiled and said, "Gee, good morning." The words still trembled, but he no longer feared the sound. The tremble had become part of his rhythm, his signature in a world of rushed voices. And though the story had spread far beyond this little store, here, in this quiet corner of town, it all began again, one good morning at a time. That evening, as Ethan closed the store, he thought about Mrs. Ramirez again. He wondered if she knew what her words had started, how they had stretched far beyond their moment, touching lives she'd never meet. He hoped she did. He hoped she felt proud. He locked the door and looked out at the night sky. Somewhere, far beyond the lights of the parking lot, the world still hurried. But inside him, everything had slowed to peace. Still, there was one truth he couldn't ignore, one quiet question that stayed in his heart. Can the world really change, or will it forget again? He didn't know the answer. But as he walked home under the stars, he whispered to himself, maybe change just needs someone to keep speaking. His voice wavered, but the words came. And for the first time, he didn't measure his worth by how smoothly they sounded, only by the courage it took to say them. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of the store settled back into its usual flow, but something about it had changed. Maybe it was the way people spoke a little softer. Maybe it was the way Ethan smiled a little wider. Or maybe it was the quiet warmth that lingered, like sunlight that refused to fade. The world outside kept moving. New customers, new stories, new days. Yet the echoes of that one moment still lived in the walls of the little grocery store. Ethan was different now. Not louder, not faster, just surer. He didn't rush his words any more. He let them come, slow and real, like ripples in calm water. And somehow, people listened more closely when he spoke. One quiet Thursday morning, Mrs. Taylor called Ethan into the back office. She was holding a large white envelope, decorated with colorful drawings and stickers. "It's for you," she said, smiling. "Came in the mail this morning." Ethan blinked. "F for me." "Yep," she said. "From a school, I think. Go on, open it." He carefully tore the seal and unfolded a stack of letters inside, handwritten notes in bright markers and crayon colors. At the top was a card that read, "To Mr. Ethan, from Mrs. Ramirez's class." Ethan's breath caught. He sat down as Mrs. Taylor quietly stepped out to give him a moment. The letters were small, clumsy, and perfect, each one different, each one heartfelt. "Dear Ethan, you are brave. Thank you for showing us it's okay to be different. My brother stutters too, and now I think he's cool. Mrs. Ramirez told us about you. We hope you smile every day." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He pressed his palm gently over his heart. Each word felt like a gentle whisper saying, "You made a difference." At the bottom of the stack was one last letter, written in Mrs. Ramirez's elegant handwriting. "Ethan, the day in the store reminded all of us that courage doesn't have to be loud. My students now raise their hands without fear of stuttering, without fear of being laughed at. You've given them something I couldn't teach, living proof that patience changes lives. Thank you for your kindness, and for letting me speak that day. With gratitude, Mrs. Ramirez." He folded the letter gently, wiping his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he didn't just feel seen. He felt understood. Later that week, Mrs. Taylor called him over during closing time. She stood by the register with a small stack of papers. "I've been thinking," she said, smiling. "You've grown a lot here, Ethan. You've earned this." He frowned slightly. What is it?" She handed him the papers. A promotion notice. "Shift supervisor," she said proudly. "You'll be training new employees. You deserve it." Ethan stared at the paper, stunned. His throat tightened, his heart racing, but this time the tremble felt like excitement, not fear. "Thank you," he managed, smiling through the stutter. Mrs. Taylor grinned. "See, that voice of yours got you here. Don't ever hide it." For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. He just nodded, blinking fast to hold back happy tears. It wasn't just a promotion. It was proof that he belonged. The next morning, the store looked the same sunlight streaming through the windows, the same soft hum of morning life. But something in the light felt different. Brighter, softer. Ethan stood behind the counter, his new name tag shining under the fluorescent lights. Ethan, shift supervisor. He took a deep breath and smiled at the simple beauty of it all, the sound of the doorbell, the faint aroma of coffee, the quiet rhythm of the scanner. Beep, pause, beep. The same sound that once reminded him of pressure now felt like the beat of a heart at peace. Customers greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Ethan," he replied, steady and sure. Good morning. How are you today?" And though his words still came in pieces, they carried a wholeness no one could miss. Kindness doesn't speak louder, it speaks deeper. The narrator's voice returns, soft and reflective. We often think strength is in volume, in how loudly we can shout, how fast we can reply, how firmly we can win. But real strength lives in gentleness. It lives in patience. It lives in moments like these, quiet, unassuming, but everlasting. The world hadn't slowed down, but Ethan had learned to move through it without losing himself. He no longer fought his pauses. He filled them with grace. Each word he spoke carried a new rhythm, not perfect, but peaceful, a sound of someone who had made peace with his voice. That afternoon, the store was calm again. Sunlight stretched across the aisles, and the warm hum of a small-town day filled the space. A boy around 12 stepped up to the counter, clutching a bottle of juice and a candy bar. His hands trembled slightly. When he spoke, his voice caught. "Hi," he said quietly, his words breaking apart. Ethan looked up and smiled gently. He recognized the fear in the boy's eyes. It was the same fear he had once known all too well. Hey there," Ethan said softly. Take your time." The boy blinked, surprised. He nodded and tried again. How much is it?" Ethan smiled wider. "It's 75 cents." The boy's shoulders relaxed. He smiled back. Thank you." Ethan handed him the change slowly, making sure there was no rush, no pressure, just understanding. "You're welcome," he said gently. "Why, you're doing great." The boy's smile widened. "Thanks." He turned and left, his steps a little lighter, his confidence a little stronger. Ethan watched him go, feeling the quiet warmth of recognition, like watching his younger self walk away, carrying a little more hope. The bell above the door chimed softly. The sound was the same as always, but now it felt like a song, a melody of everything that had changed, everything that had healed. He glanced toward the front windows. Sunlight poured in, golden and gentle. Dust motes danced in the air, tiny sparks of light suspended in time. The world was the same, and yet everything was different. Ethan smiled to himself and whispered, full circle." He turned back to his counter, hands steady, heart at peace. The scanner beeped softly. Beep, pause, beep. The same rhythm that once reminded him of struggle now pulsed like a heartbeat of quiet courage. We never truly know how far our actions travel. One kind word can echo through 1,000 lives. One moment of patience can become someone's lifelong strength. In a world that rushes, it takes courage to wait. In a world that shouts, it takes wisdom to listen. And in a world that often mocks difference, it takes love to protect it. Ethan's story began with a stutter, but it ended with understanding. Not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that lingers quietly in people's hearts. Mrs. Ramirez had once said that patience wasn't waiting, it was understanding. Now, Ethan lived that truth every single day. And somewhere, in another town, another store, another life, someone else would pause before mocking. Someone else would listen a little longer. Someone else would wait. Because kindness, once spoken, never stops moving. As the day faded and the golden light stretched across the counter, Ethan took one last look around the store before closing. The quiet hum, the smell of coffee, the gleam of glass, all felt alive with gratitude. He walked to the door, flipped the sign to closed, and looked through the window at the small world outside. People hurried home. Cars passed. The sun slipped behind the horizon. He smiled and whispered, "Tea. Thank you, Mrs. R. Ramirez." Then he turned off the lights. The store went dark, but the warmth remained, a quiet glow of all that had been learned, all that had been healed. And somewhere, beyond the silence, the rhythm of courage carried on. Soft, steady, endless. Beep. Pause. Beep. The sound of kindness that never fades. The story of Ethan and Mrs. Ramirez didn't end with the closing of that store. It never really could. Because some stories, the quiet ones, the honest ones, don't close. They echo. They drift through time, touching lives they'll never see, softening hearts they'll never know. And in those small, unseen ripples, they keep living. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to months. The grocery store went on. The same aisles, the same hum of conversation, the same sunlight falling across the counter each morning. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of life, something sacred had taken root. A seed of kindness had been planted, and the world, without realizing it, had begun to bloom. People who had witnessed the moment in that store told others. Those others told more, and little by little the story spread, not through noise, not through fame, but through feeling. In another town, a teacher reminded her class to be the voice that steadies someone else's. In a small cafe, a barista smiled at a nervous customer who stumbled over their order, saying, "Take your time." At a busy office, a manager paused during a meeting and said softly, "Let's listen, really listen." These moments didn't make headlines. They didn't trend. But they mattered. Because empathy doesn't demand attention. It asks only for presence. The world changes not when we shout louder, but when we listen deeper. There is a quiet revolution that happens when we slow down long enough to see each other, really see. Not through the lens of perfection, not through comparison, but through simple understanding. We forget how heavy silence can feel until someone fills it with compassion. We forget how fragile people are until someone speaks gently enough to remind us that strength can also sound soft. Ethan's stutter became a language of its own, a rhythm that taught people to wait, to breathe, to feel. Each pause in his speech carried a truth. That we all stumble, we all hesitate, and we all need grace. It wasn't his fluency that changed people. It was his courage to keep speaking, even when the world wasn't patient enough to listen. Every person carries something unseen, a story, a fear, a quiet battle fought in silence. Some hide it behind laughter, some behind confidence, some behind work, routine, or distance. But beneath it all, we're the same, trying to be heard, trying to belong, trying to connect. The story of the grocery store was never just about one moment of cruelty or one act of kindness. It was about all of us. It was about the cashier who keeps showing up, the teacher who chooses compassion over convenience, the stranger who decides not to look away. It's about how 1 second of empathy can rewrite someone's whole day, maybe even their life. And it's about how fragile this world really is when we forget to listen. One morning, months later, a woman stood in a different grocery line in another city. She noticed the clerk's hands trembling slightly as he spoke. His voice caught, unsure, and before impatience could rise in her, she smiled and said, "It's okay. Take your time." He smiled back, his shoulders easing. And though she didn't know it, she had carried the echo forward. The the same kindness that once began in a small store miles away. That's how empathy works. It doesn't vanish when the moment ends. It travels, through voices, through gestures, through memory. Every act becomes a seed. Every seed, when met with patience, becomes a flower. And somewhere, in that quiet blooming, humanity remembers itself. There is beauty in the pauses between words, in the seconds before a reply, in the space between breath and understanding. We rush to fill silence, afraid of what it might reveal. But silence is not emptiness. It is invitation. It's the space where empathy is born. Ethan's story reminds us that sometimes we don't need to fix the world's noise. We just need to soften it. When someone struggles to speak, when their hands tremble, when their voice falters, that's not the moment to turn away. That's the moment to listen closer. Because within every hesitation, there's truth. And within every truth, there's humanity. Patience, Mrs. Ramirez once said, isn't waiting. It's understanding. Those words have become a quiet mantra across time and distance. They belong now to everyone who's ever stopped to help, to everyone who's ever chosen kindness over convenience. The world doesn't change because of great speeches or perfect words. It changes because of simple acts. A smile, a pause, a hand extended. Somewhere tonight, a mother will read this story to her child, and the child will ask, "Why did they laugh at him?" And the mother will say, "Because they didn't understand yet." But they learned, and that learning, that gentle awakening will move through generations like light through glass. As for Ethan, he didn't seek recognition. He didn't chase the story that had made its way around the world. He just kept living, one day at a time, one word at a time. But every so often he would remember that day the harshness, the courage, the calm voice that changed everything. He kept Mrs. Ramirez's letter pinned inside his locker. Every morning he'd glance at it before clocking in, the words a soft reminder. Courage doesn't have to be loud. And as the store's doors opened and the light poured in, he felt a quiet gratitude that went beyond words, because kindness had given him back his voice, not a perfect one, but a true one. And truth, he realized, was all a voice ever needed to be. In places Ethan would never visit, in classrooms, offices, and homes, his story became a reference point, a quiet lesson in patience. Teachers reminded students that the strongest voices are sometimes the slowest. Employers remembered to listen before judging. Friends waited for each other to finish their thoughts. The world didn't transform overnight, but it began to shift slowly, gently, like the turning of the tide after a long storm. Because the echo of empathy never fades, it only finds new hearts to inhabit. Evening falls in the little town where it all began. Through the grocery store's wide windows, warm light spills onto the sidewalk. Inside, Ethan tidies the counter, humming softly under his breath. Outside, the sun dips low gold, melting into amber. He pauses for a moment, glancing toward the door. In the reflection, he sees himself calm, steady, smiling. And for a fleeting second, the reflection shifts. He sees Mrs. Ramirez standing beside him, smiling that same knowing smile. It's only a trick of light, but he feels it. Her presence. Her lesson. He whispers softly, "Thank you." The words echo just enough to fill the quiet. Kindness doesn't speak louder, it speaks deeper. This truth lingers as the narrator's voice slows, almost like a lullaby. We live surrounded by noise, constant, endless, demanding. But within that noise lies a question, simple, eternal, human. When was the last time you paused not to respond, not to fix, not to judge, but simply to listen? Because sometimes, All a person needs is a moment of your silence to find their own voice again. Outside, the night deepens. The street grows quiet. Somewhere, far away, another voice hesitates, a stutter, a pause, a heartbeat of uncertainty. But this time, someone nearby waits. They listen. They smile. And in that simple act, the world becomes softer again. The echo continues. In voices, in hearts, in pauses, a gentle rhythm of empathy that outlives every word. Beep. Pause. Beep. The heartbeat of understanding. The sound of kindness that never ends.